There is something that Osho said about communes, that 95% of all communes have died within the first 5 years of their creation, mostly because it's very difficult to create something in a vacuum. If you're not surrounded by people that want your commune to exist, or you don't provide something to that community, your surrounding community, that makes them want you to be there, it's not going to make it.
We are learning to trust the ever-evolving rhythms of nature.
We are committed to embracing our shadow within community
and reclaiming our sovereignty.
We do this together.
That is the way.
Welcome to the Elemental Movement podcast. I'm Matt Matucci, and I have two friends, acquaintances with me here. Akash, what's your last name, Akash?
Akash doesn't have a last name. When I went to India, they gave me the name Swami Dhyan Akash. Dhyan is the prefix, and Akash is just, Akash. It means sky in Hindi.
Okay. Well, welcome, Akash. And I have a dear friend with me as well, Zach. We've connected over the last, and what was, I don't even know your last name, Zach.
I have two of them, Kaplan and Moss. I usually just Moss is easiest.
Zach Moss. Well, welcome, Zach. Welcome, Akash. Thanks for meeting me today. All right. Well, I wanted to get started. The reason why I felt compelled to have this conversation was both Zach and myself are very interested in developing intentional community, for lack of a better term. And we don't really know, at least I don't really know, I should speak for myself, exactly what that's going to look like. But I know in my heart that I need to make that happen. And I think that I can speak for Zach in saying that that's part of your desires too. And you, Akash, seem like a very interesting person to talk to about this subject, because I know a little bit about your history, and I'd love for you to share a little bit with all the listeners about your history with community and what's your background with regards to that.
Well, we'll start with the fact that my dad was in the military and I grew up all over the world. And that is, in a certain way, a commune, a community, because on the base, you're kind of isolated from the rest of everyone, and you all have a particular mindset, and you're all focused on what we're here for, which is to protect the world, I guess, and whatever that's all about. Joined myself, got involved with a metaphysical girlfriend who introduced me to yoga and reincarnation and yoga, and decided that nuclear missiles on submarine isn't something I wanted to do anymore. So I got out and lived in a commune in Virginia, the Shenandoah Valley. That lasted for about 2 years and it fell apart. And I went off to India and lived in a commune with Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh at the time, who later became Osho for political reasons. Everyone knew who Rajneesh was, but they didn't know who Osho was, so he was safer that way. Anyway, that community left for political reasons. He then eventually started up again in Eastern Oregon. And that commune was the longest that I lived in. It lasted the longest, about 5 years. And then after that, that was pretty much all of the official communal living that I did. I often lived in communal houses where people who were like-minded like myself, who also used to follow Osho, we'd all get houses together, nice, big, expensive houses, and we all shared the rent and lived nicely, and because we all got along. I won't go into the details around what makes his followers, which were called sannyasins, what makes them just get along, but they just do. There's something about something that happens in an initiation with a master like that just makes it easy for you to grok what's going on with that person and what's going, how to meld that in with yourself. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but I will say the reason I'm bringing all that up is because there is something that Osho said about communes, that 95% of all communes have died within the first 5 years of their creation, mostly because it's very difficult to create something in a vacuum. if you're not surrounded by people that want your commune to exist, or you don't provide something to that community, your surrounding community, that makes them want you to be there, it's not going to make it. It's just not going to go there. The second piece is it's usually around some concept or idea that everyone is buying into. In the case of the Rajneesh commune, everyone is buying into Osho, right? The only real successful current communes that have lasted for any length of time, the majority of them are in Israel, the kibbutzes, because they're supported by the government. The government wants them there to take care of the children that don't have parents anymore because of the wars that were constantly going on. There's the farm, which has managed to live, and I haven't looked very carefully into it, but I would suggest that if you guys are really going to do this, you need to find out which ones actually have continued to exist and what their focus is. What is it that everybody that's there is there to help create? Sometimes it's led by a charismatic individual, which may or may not be good for them. And sometimes it's an idea, like Findhorn in Scotland was not really led by Peter and his wife. Their focus was on creating gardens that were supposedly supported by fairies and gnomes and yada yada. And what they managed to grow supported their theory. I mean, very few people could see them, but they reported that they could see them and that they were part of that whole thing. So Findhorn was successful for a long period of time because their focus was on this one thing and everybody was focused on that, making that happen. Any questions so far?
I have lots of questions, but
then I'm gonna stop right now and fill in the rest of it later.
Yeah, but I'd love to invite Zach if any questions have come up for you to step in first.
Yeah, I think this big question of why communities fail is something that I'm definitely interested in. But I think there's that first part that you talk about of getting along, and how there was a way in which your experience in communities have been successful in the ways where you've seen people really getting along. And that's, I wonder if you could speak a little more to like what, you said a little bit about how Osho and the kind of the shared, maybe a shared religion helps people get along. But what are the factors you think, inside a community or as you're beginning a community where you can sort of feel, okay, who's a good fit and what is a good fit? What does that actually mean?
Well, you're going to need some wise people to help pick those people, because picking the right people will make all the difference in the world. It only takes one person to take the whole thing down. So you've got to be very careful with who you choose. Your question, I believe, was, I didn't quite get the question. Ask it one more time.
I'm curious, I guess, just the factors of like what getting along. I think we know what getting along feels like in a friendship. I think it's something different when it's in community. So I'm wondering, in your experience, communities that have worked and haven't worked, what is that kind of that nebulous factor of getting along? Is it a shared vision? Is it working together? What does it actually mean to get along in a community sense, which is different, I think, than a friendship or a family?
The shared vision is a major part of it. You have to all be doing this commune for a particular reason. I have one crowd who is planning to do something in Costa Rica around open sexuality and healthy sexuality. That's going to be their primary focus, teaching classes, bringing people in. That's how they're going to make money. The other piece is conflict management. Now, just two people together, there's just basically one relationship between those two people. When you're saying bring a third person in, you've got the relationship between these two, these two, these two, then the relationship between these two and this one, between these two and this one, you get the idea. And then there's the relationship between all three of them at the same time. Knowing which dynamically is going on when you're relating, that really requires some skill and experience in knowing how to navigate the communication. Okay, so now let's add the fourth person and the fifth and the sixth. And now you get that there is a considerable amount of skill necessary in order to navigate all that. Some people will show up, they're bringing past life experience, and they're just going to know. They're just going to know how to deal with it. Some people are going to have aptitude, but not enough experience. But have the ability to bring things together. But the conflict piece, how do you deal with conflict? Even polyamory, any successful polyamorous relationship requires an incredible amount of communication and skill in that. If you don't have it, then the thing blows up, from fear or jealousy or who the hell knows.
That sounds incredibly complex.
It
The
is.
complexity of these relationships and the
Yes.
dynamics with it.
Yeah.
I would love to hear a specific example of conflict arising in a community that you're a part of, that maybe either anything that feels alive for you, where there was an amicable resolution to the conflict, or it like really blew up, it got out of hand, something that feels like it wants to be shared.
Well, all the people that I aligned myself with and all the communes that I was in, generally, in one commune, there was one guy who was missing a leg. He was very sensitive about it. And me, having a little Asperger's, figured he was in on the joke and wouldn't take it personally. And in fact, thought it was, and he even said something along those lines, but at some point he really got upset with me. And we brought another person in, and he just told me his truth with a little charge. And of course, I had to say, what you have to say is important to me, but I can't hear it the way you're saying it. If you could either discharge whatever is going on inside you around this and then come back to me with the information, I can take it in and I'll change my behavior, because I don't want you being unhappy. I love you. You're part of my commune. And that is how it went. He got rid of his charge. We came back together and he explained what his upset was about the joking and kidding around. And I didn't do it anymore, except that later on he joked at me about the same thing. So obviously, whatever charge he had about the whole thing, it just needed to come up in that way. So it's really, how do you manage the charge that comes up in a group? How do you manage the charge between two people or between three people? And what are the protocols that you're going to follow when the shit hits the fan, which it always does. It's never not gonna.
Can you share a time when shit did hit the fan?
Yeah, I have a little shame around this one. So the commune that I was living in Virginia, all the men went out to spread the word. They were so the guy that was leading the whole thing had been a Baptist minister, and he made it all the way to the top and discovered how corrupt the whole scene was. He went into the dark night of the soul for the next 2 or 3 years doing drugs and sex and yada, yada, yada. And then at some point, he started getting into hypnosis and ended up starting to do some of the work that Edgar Cayce had done, which was going into trance, giving information that was very interesting and very useful for people's lives. And it was around that they decided to build a commune. And they went out into the world to spread the seminars that they were teaching to help people discover their inner light. That was what was called inner light consciousness, which was not really a religious thing. It was more of a spiritual, metaphysical kind of focus. And I was left behind to take care of the commune because I have so many skills. And a couple of wives got lonely because their men are out for a month, 2 months, 3 months at a time. And I succumbed to their wiles, and that kind of really brought shit to the whole situation. Of course, I'm ejected out. They all come together under the leader. The leader is the one who brought everybody back into some kind of sense about what was going on, because the husbands felt betrayed by the wives, let alone me. The wives felt abandoned by the husbands, and there were a whole bunch of other kind of things. So it was the leader, because of his influence, his charisma, you might say, their commitment to what was coming through him, that helped to kind of put a container on it and move forward through it.
You had mentioned this Virginia commune. It fell apart at some point, though. And so is
Yeah,
this
it
part
was
of,
after, it was probably a year after that, and it wasn't because of what had happened with me. It was, we weren't making enough money.
oh, okay. So it's for financial reasons
Yes,
that it fell apart.
exactly. Yeah. It was a beautiful piece of land. The Shenandoah Valley is one of the most fecund areas on the planet I've ever been in. More diversity than I've ever seen anywhere else, really.
Mm.
And it was hard to let that land go, I'm sure. We all wanted to keep it going, but it just didn't happen. So
How much land was there that you guys had?
acres, like, I don't know, 60, 70 acres. It
Wow.
was huge. Yeah, it was huge.
Wow.
And we had the greatest horticulturalist in the world at that time, Alan Chadwick, come in. And he started building gardens and teaching everyone about French intensive biodynamic gardening and raised beds. And he's the one that brought that. I don't know if you've ever been exposed to any of that before, but he's the one that brought that in. And that was an amazing experience. He was an amazing individual. I could go, I have so many stories, but not relative to what we're talking about.
I am curious to kind of bring this back to the conflicts, and really resolution actually is what I'm most curious about. Is, do you feel that like this conflict, it kind of sounds like it ended with the leader kind of coming in and creating an end? Do you think that was a resolution? And how do you know when a conflict is resolved? You know, like you said, you had that earlier conflict with a man with one leg, and then there was still some charge later. So I'm just curious about your sense of when a conflict is resolved and when you move on from it, you know, and whether in your experience when you've moved on too quickly or when you have felt that this is resolved and it's complete.
My answer to that is you only learn about that through experience. That's not something that you can set out in protocol. And what you need is someone who is a skilled individual in conflict resolution. A leader like that guy was, Paul Solomon was his name, by the way, a leader who has the wherewithal to collect a whole bunch of people together and create something with them, has the ability to bring them to a place where conflict is resolved. And you can tell because people are laughing and enjoying themselves again. The conflict is over. You know, that's really how you can tell. Like I said, with this guy with the one leg, he teased me later on. That's how I knew everything was cool. So yeah, that's how you can tell, is that people are getting along. But again, it really requires someone who has skill in making that happen, who has a solid understanding of dynamics, both at the personal level, at the one-on-one level, and the one-on-many level, the group level. And I'll tell you, I am a somatic practitioner, which is kind of like a psychotherapist with the body added in. I'm not licensed in the state of California, so I try and stay away from the word therapist, but it's essentially what I do. I am really good one-on-one and with couples, but when it comes to dealing with a group, that's just not my energy. I'm not good at holding the space for a group. I understand the dynamics. I could probably tell somebody what to look at and where to go, but to actually perform the process myself, I have not a lot of skill in. I did teach at San Francisco State, but the way in which I dealt with that was by going through the room at the beginning of the class and relating to each person one-on-one, so that everyone connected with me, and then, you know, did my best to just deal with a group. But there are people whose soul is designed to deal with groups and maybe even shy away from the one-on-one thing.
That feels true.
Yeah, Matt, you feel like somebody who is definitely headed in the direction of that.
Yeah, thank you.
Do you enjoy being up in front of a crowd?
I do and I don't. I'm in the process of stepping into that space. It's been an unfolding in the last couple of years.
How about you, Zach?
I enjoy being in front of a group. I think I do well one-on-one, but I'm finding that I have some skill with sort of feeling an energy of a group and kind of holding that space for a group of people. It's something I like and want to lean into more, but I need to learn a lot more about it.
That's how I would have read you. Yeah. And
yeah, so I guess I have a lot of questioning. I watched that documentary about the Rajneeshis. What was it? Wild
Country.
Wild Country. That's it. So I have like a, that frames all I know about that whole time period, that
Which
5
is,
years.
yeah, which is not a good representation.
That's what I figure.
Yeah, it had to have a level of controversy and
Yeah.
gossip to it in order to keep people interested, because a commune that's about finding yourself and getting closer to who you truly are as opposed to what society is trying to make you, most people really aren't interested in that, you know?
It lacks the drama, right?
Exactly.
So one thing I just remember from that documentary that really captivated me, that I just loved, was I love a good training montage, like when just things are just like building and like everything is just going really well. And it just seemed like in that documentary they captured, there's this moment where like there was an immense amount of energy of like building and creating and creation, and like the stuff that was achieved was quite impressive.
It was unbelievable.
I would love to hear about that a little bit from your eyes.
Well, I'll give you an example of the areas that I worked in. What I'm about to say about the mechanics shop is more common these days than it was back then. It was pretty innovative, which is the floors were all heated by the burnt oil from the vehicles. They had a special burner that completely burned it to nothing and took that heat, heated the floors. The floors were all painted white, so you didn't even need drop lights to work on the vehicles. And it was cleaned every night. I mean, it was spick and span and it was beautiful. It was just aesthetic, just the way everything was all set up. That's the car garage. I was doing heavy equipment, you know, trucks, 18-wheelers and things like that. And I had access to all the tools and all the parts and all the trucks. And just all the time I wanted to play with them, you know. And we worked 14 hours a day, but we had 2 hours off for lunch, an hour off in the morning, hour and a half off in the afternoon, dinner, and then working more. Not always into the night, but we were just so pumped at what we were doing. Often we would take people from different departments to go help one project. Like we were building these A-frames for people to stay in over the celebrations that were coming up. And they were simple to build, and having a whole bunch of people assemble them and do them, have, you know, be instructed. That was just crazy fun. To have everybody just doing this same thing all together, having all the things that you need to do it, and people just singing and being in a state of meditation while doing it. That was really, really cool.
That must have been special to be a part of.
It was. And it was, you know, it was a little lonely at times too, because we were so focused on what we were doing. We didn't get to spend a lot of time with each other. But when you did get to be with people, you just appreciated it and it went well, generally most of the time. There wasn't a lot of conflict, mostly because we were all, again, focused on where it was we wanted to go. And if there was any kind of conflict, they would just move them to a different department. So they didn't get into conflict with whoever they were in conflict. And if that repeated with the same individual, off the commune they went, because they didn't have time to deal with that stuff at the time.
What was the scale of this project? Like how many people?
There were a minimum of 1,000 people living on the ranch at any given time.
Wow.
Yes.
That's immense. Were there any children?
Yes. Not a lot though, because Osho had encouraged people not to have children. While we were all in India, we were all getting fixed. You know, vasectomies and tubes tied. And his point there is that when you have a child, you're basically imprisoned for 20 years and you're not focused on your own growth. You're focused
I'll corroborate that.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
To some degree, there's some truth to that for sure.
It sounds like this was like a really great experience in a lot of ways of people really working together and contributing in equal ways. And it's something I'm really interested in community, is that contribution and how people put in work. And I'm curious about your experience with, like, do you think it has to be equal? Like everybody puts in the same amount? Or I guess the real question for me is, how do you create a community where the contribution feels fair? And is that a measure of equality, or what is it that gets to this place of everybody's working together and nobody's like, you're not working as hard as me?
It never feels fair. because building a commune requires more energy than you would normally put into your own life.
Yeah.
And the way in which we dealt with that in the first commune in Virginia was the teacher saying, basically, if you see something that needs to be done, you're probably the one that needs to do it. That was a big one. Oh, another thing was gossip. I'll get back to the gossip in a moment. I don't want to forget to tell you about that. The thing is that you're all focused on what you want to have happen, and that keeps you juiced. That keeps you alive. You're not concerned about whether that person is doing as much as you are, because you're too fucking busy having fun doing what you're doing. Even if you're cleaning toilets, it's like, you know that you're doing it. Oh, that was the other piece. You do what you do like you're doing it for your beloved, for God, for Jesus, for your wife, for whoever it is that makes your heart open the most. Whatever you put your hands into, put love into it, and just and do it the best that you possibly can with whatever you've got. And that means when you've made a mistake, oh, well, maybe I can just leave it. No, I'm going to do this right. You tear it all apart again, you do it over again. You know what I mean? It's like that. That creates a level of aesthetic, beauty, integrity that energetically touches everybody that comes in contact with the space.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great answer.
So the gossip thing, this is something the first teacher taught, Paul Solomon. Gossip is the most destructive force on the planet. If you think about all of the wars and all of the things that have happened, it all comes from people not really telling the truth or saying something behind somebody's back that they wouldn't say to their face. So his rule was that if you hear somebody gossiping about somebody else, you go to them and you say, so I've just heard you say this. I want you to go to that person and tell them that you just said this. And if you don't, I will. That way, you're never going to say anything that you wouldn't say to the other person's face, ever. Because if you do the gossip thing, you're feeling powerless. And this is the only way you can feel any kind of power, is by saying something bad about them so you can feel one up, one down on them. Not in front of them, though, because who knows? Your reasons for looking down on them may not be valid. That is another key feature that I would pass on to anybody getting involved with the commune. No one up, one down.
So a lot comes up for me there when you share that, because what I feel then in my heart is this idea of, with the right people, I'm not afraid to share truth with them. But like, I have like patients, for example. I'm an acupuncturist, right? And I treat people that I can't share, like, I can see what they need to do to make themselves like in right relation with nature, but I can't be fully honest and truthful with them.
No, and I have the same problem being a therapist. When someone walks in the door, because of my skills of reading, I see everything right then and there.
Yeah. Like
that. The whole gestalt. But if I were to tell them everything I see right then and there, they'd go running out the door with their hands in their ears. Ah!
Yeah. Yeah. And but sometimes, like, being the limited human that I am, I feel like I want to discharge some of that truth to someone else. Like, oh, I want to like share that with someone. Like, I won't share names. I won't like, but
that's what a supervisor for. That's what a supervisor is for. In the work that I do, we have people that we go to deal with what comes up in our sessions, and they help you to connect with what it is inside of you that feels powerless enough to want to say something. And then perhaps you develop the resource necessary to make you feel strong in that situation, rather than the weakness that you're in touch with. I hope that's it.
Yeah, I'm curious if we might need another word, because I think that in my experience in community, there are times when something will happen, and there will be some charge built up. And I find it's helpful for me to go talk to my friends and kind of talk it through without the person where the charge is. So that when I come to that conversation, I can come to it with more perspective and less charge. Right. And I think that seems like in my experience, that seems like a pretty healthy process. And you might call that gossip, because I'm talking about this person when they're not present.
No, because I said, don't say anything you wouldn't say to their face. Not necessarily in the way in which you would say it. Right?
Yeah.
You don't want to say that to them, but you do want to get the information out to them. So you're there with your friends to help you discharge.
Yeah.
I call them, in the work that I do, I call them feeling buddies. They're there to just be with you so you can just feel it, get it out of your system, and then you go to them and you say, this is how it affected me. I'd really rather not go through that again. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, that's great. But yeah, I wonder like if there's a term or like, because I still might call that gossip. Like I still think like, is there a word for when you're doing this conversation without the person present? You know, you're talking about them, you're doing, I think that's kind of to me the
Seems like
definition
you're
of gossip.
yeah, it seems more like
It-
you're processing in that moment.
Processing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
it's more.
processing with your friends.
So there's can be kind of a fine line then. And
Well,
with like,
gossip is, yeah,
I've experienced it, like, you know, I'll bring my wife into this because she's not here and I can just gossip about her, right? But like I've witnessed, right? Like my wife, she's like processing with me, sharing something about her friends that's bothering her. And then it's like there's a moment where it like crosses over into gossip. And
yes.
it's like,
And
this
and I'll
does not
repeat.
feel like processing anymore. Now
Yes.
we're like just like scratching at this thing, and now it doesn't feel healthy.
I'll repeat what I said is the difference between the
Yeah.
processing and the gossip is the one up, one down dynamic. When you get into a place where you need to feel better than that other person, because actually underneath of it, you feel weak, that's when it becomes gossip. When you realize you're just in a charged moment, you actually want to feel connected to that person, but right now they feel like a shithole. You deal with that charge right here and now. Once that's gone, then you come back to sanity and you realize, oh, I love this person. I'm going to go share with them what I went through. And you're not in a one up, one down relationship. You're in a peer-to-peer relationship with them. So if your intention is not to do that one up, one down thing, not to live in that anyway, because even I reactively sometimes end up there. I don't want to, but I do.
Great. That's so helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Akash. I appreciate it. I wanted to bring the conversation back to this idea of contribution. And, you know, you said it never will feel fair, right? There's always so much work to be done in a community setting. What have you seen in your experience with regards to like accountability and holding, like if someone isn't actually contributing as much as they like, there's clearly someone who's not contributing that much and other people are, and like what have you seen from that? What is your experience there?
So you bring them in. Whoever is running the place brings them in and says, so how do you feel about being here? Why are you here? Is your passion here? Are you excited to be here? Because if you really truly are, you're not going to be thinking about whether it's fair or not. You just want to fucking do it. It just feels good to do it. I have the energy. I want to do it. I'm going to do it. Simple as that.
That's nice and simple.
Yeah. If you want to be there, you're going to be there. If you don't want to be there, you're just there because you can't afford to go anywhere else. Too fucking bad. Get out of here.
You know, I've been in situations where people don't want to be there, but they're still there because, you know, they have nowhere else to go. They don't have the money.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. So what have you seen? You know, they're ultimately, I'm not really willing to like call police on people in my community, even if they're not contributing the way I want them to. I haven't been in a community with like a real strong leader. So maybe that's the answer. But like, how do you get people to leave when you go to someone, you say, why are you here? And they're not there because they share your vision. They're there because it's cheap or because they have nowhere else to go. How do you get them to leave?
I'll give you an extreme example and then you apply the dynamics. You've heard of the bonobo chimpanzees?
Yeah.
So when one of the females get raped, all of the other females come together and they beat the shit out of the guy who did it. He never does that again. So the truth is you bring the whole community together and they all say what they have to say about this individual. And this person is likely feeling like they aren't resourced enough to take care of themselves, which is a lie. They probably are, but just have somehow been hypnotized by their parents or family of origin or by who knows what, and that they don't think that they can handle it out in the world without being taken care of by mommy, daddy, community. So in a sense, you can be codependent with this person, or you can have them face themselves and say, please go find another way to be in the world. Pretty exciting, huh?
It is
Well,
very
scary.
much so.
They had at the commune in Scotland, Findhorn, they had a triumvirate. Am I saying that right? Triumvirate? Anyway, people who ran the place. And then at some point there were 5 of them that all ran the place together. And they were always did things through consensus, and they worked it out until they were at consensus. And, you know, one individual would ask that person to leave, or they would all come together and say, you know, it depends. And you're going to have turnover just like your body has turnover. You know, you have cells that die and need to leave, new cells coming on.
Yeah, so that brings me to what questions come up then are you're coming from like a capitalist world, right? Like we have this system of money and whatnot, and then how do you, if there's a transition that has to take part, right? And people then invest themselves in this community. How does that work in terms of ownership? What have you experienced with that? Like you're putting all this energy and time into this thing, this community, and then, you know, if people are asked to leave, like they're left with basically nothing for their time potentially. That gets very,
All right,
very
so
complicated,
yeah,
very messy.
I understand your question, and here's my wisdom about that. If you think about the current system that we're living under, ownership is theft. Everything that anyone chooses to own is defended by the police, which is defended by the military, basically by force. Okay, the people that own land own it because they fought to own it. They killed to own it. Okay, so that's what's at the foundation of that system. There's no getting around it, and it will always be that way until we shift into the nothing belongs to anybody thing, which the Chinese may end up giving us at some point in the next 30 or 40 years.
Or Klaus Schwab.
They've been doing it all along, but they haven't been doing it with enough integrity. And you know, that may never happen on this planet, but that would be the goal, which is everyone gets what they need. I don't know if you watch Star Trek or not, but that is a pure example of no one needs to own anything because everyone has everything they need. The only thing that you get is that you have to work for is position in adventures. You know what I mean? In things you want to do and to create. But there's no lack of food anymore. They don't use money. But again, it's very difficult to create what it is you want to create in a vacuum. That is not what is on the outside of you. So what you have to do is find something that makes you a prostitute in a certain way. You have to find some service that this capitalist society finds useful, make money on that and use that to live with, and that everybody that comes to be there does that. Anybody who comes into that situation, however, you can set it up so that they have to give everything they own to the commune, but I think that's kind of stupid. But that's just my opinion. I think they should be able to leave with whatever they brought, unless they specifically give it to the commune. I think that no one gets to own anything in a commune. We all own something, and there has to be trust built between each of us that says, I'm going to get what I need in order to survive here, certainly, and maybe even to thrive, depending on how much energy everyone puts into the whole commune, you know? And if I'm giving because I expect something in return, well, good luck with that. You just got to give and not expect anything in return and see what the universe throws back at you. That is really the difference between a needs-based love relationship and a love relationship. We are love. We don't need to be loved. No one needs to be loved because we are love. We have so much available to us within us that we don't need to go looking for that thing that got mixed up when we were growing up. Somehow survival and need got mixed in with the love piece, and they're not the same thing. Your need piece comes from your solar plexus. The love piece comes from your heart. Two different chakras. They wouldn't be separate if they didn't have different domains. So they don't need to be mixed up. You can mix them up, obviously, but why? I kind of got on my soapbox there.
I like it.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I feel I really agree with everything you're saying. And I feel when I think about trying to create a community that's based on that, I feel a lot of anxiety of like, how do I convince people? How do I get people to believe that they don't, that ownership is theft and that nothing is going to be owned and that what they give to the community is pure gift?
You can't convince anybody. All you
Yeah.
can do is live that life.
And find the right people, right?
That the right people will be attracted to this. People that are interested in discovering themselves, especially their dark sides. People who are interested in pain and discomfort, because it's half of life. Anybody who's rejecting half of the yin yang sign, you don't want living there.
100%.
And half the time, the world is awesome, and half the time it's fucked up. And it's always been that way, and it will always be that way, and it will always be at the same time. It's not going to be, ooh, and it's going to be, it's always going to be a mixture of everything, And how do you swim through all of that? How do you surf through all of that? How do you navigate with your heart open?
That makes me think of just kind of one of the issues of modernity is that there's so much of like trying to protect us from the dark side and the hard stuff. And what really creates a numbing. And so there's this massive numbing of everything that's been going on since I've been alive, for sure.
Yeah. Why do you think the whole tattooing and piercing thing is so prevalent? Because everyone's lives are so soft and comfy. You get up from that warm, comfy couch and you get into your warm, comfy car and you walk into that warm, comfy building. You never feel anything. You never feel the contrast. And so you have to do artificial pain so that you can have some connection with your body besides sexuality, which always wears off over time.
Yeah. So I would head to some questions about after you left the Eastern Oregon community. You referenced how you have lived in communal housing in some way or another quite a bit since then.
Oh, well, I haven't in the last 25 years.
Okay.
Primarily because I spent the first half of my adult life in the spiritual world, trying to understand me and my relationship to my existence and my body and all that other stuff. Ending, when all of the Rajneesh thing ended, I realized that I needed to, if I'm going to change the system, I have to get into it. So I have to become a part of it. And so I have lived with, in the beginning, I mean, maybe the first year or two, I lived in communal houses, but then after that, it was with girlfriends. And what it means to be intimate with somebody, which means I have to be intimate with myself, which means I have to look at myself and look at what I'm afraid is not real and what I'm afraid is real.
So I just had curiosity as to like what led you away from more of like a communal living place into this like living with just maybe a girlfriend.
Again, I felt I made a conscious decision. I'm not going to live outside on the boundaries anymore. I'm going to get into the middle of this shithole mess.
Okay. And what has been your experience in getting in the middle of the shithole?
So the Rajneesh scene was a very open, alive, expressive, loving, as much as it could be, scene. And one thing Osho said about sexuality is that your sex reflects your life force, and your life force reflects your sexuality. And he encouraged us all to engage in sexuality in a conscious way through meditation and watching how we choose what we choose. And so there was a lot of skill and consciousness around sexuality. Now imagine living in that society where he had probably 100,000 people following him. Okay, so there were plenty enough people to kind of mix it all up and figure out what the fuck's going on with all that shit. Imagine coming into a society where 4 out of 5 women have been molested before the age of 18. Their first sexual experience is horrible. And that's what they hold in their bodies. And that's how they approach sex. Now they're going to use sex to get what they want, to get a husband. They might have a child, but not because, there's, I'm sorry, so many reasons that people want to have children. And I'm not banging on you. I'm not saying specifically you're a bad.
Bang away.
But it's free love. Your community supports you. Your parents are very happy. There's all sorts of reasons that you might have a child that don't really have to do with, you know what, something inside of me says this is the right thing right now, and the environment is right for it, and my community supports it, so I'm going to go in that direction. So few people make the decision from that place.
Well, I push on that a little bit with agreement and say that I don't think a lot of people have the luxury of coming from that place. Our communities, the way the system is right now, it is very hard for parents, and there isn't a lot of support, community support for parents.
Well, it's probably just as well, because there's 8 billion people on this planet, and that's too many for it to sustain right now. We're going to hit a very hard stop very soon, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but I don't know. 8 billion people means that there's 8 billion possibilities for fixing the whole thing, but it's a real if. It's a real if you look at the science.
Yeah. And if everyone didn't have kids, we would have 0 people.
I'm not interested in no one having kids.
So some people have to have kids.
I want there to be consciousness by the whole crowd.
Absolutely.
And that requires consciousness around your sexual motivations. Most guys have no idea what makes them want to have sex with a girl. They just know they do. They want to have it. Most people don't really look at what's behind them wanting to have a baby. They just do it. They don't look at what's making them want to do it. They just, I got to do it. I got to do it because it's very compelling.
I 100% agree.
So imagine me coming from that environment where people are really conscious around sexuality into a society where not at all.
Not at all.
Imagine how many times I'm going to stumble and embarrass myself, especially with the Asperger's features that I have, which means it's difficult for me to anticipate ahead of time when I say something that is just calculated that they're going to take personally and emotionally and, trigger and turn me into the monster and yada, yada. You know what I mean? Imagine how long it would take for me to figure that one out on my own. And then relax into, well, how can I still be myself and not trigger people and be a resource for sexuality so that people can have it be healthy in their lives rather than all the perverted, repressed, scary shit that's going on out here. So that's, again, the sexuality represents the life force. Everybody is insane out here. And my definition of insanity is conflict between the brains. We have 3 brains. Most people aren't really very cognizant of that, but we have the instinctual brain, which is what protects us from getting hurt, right? You don't think, it just happens, right? There's the emotional brain, which allows us to operate in a group because instinct doesn't work very well in changing behavior. It's kill or run, right? There's no feedback. So emotion is the second brain. And then the thinking brain, which we all have, is for calculating, well, what might be a better way of approaching this that the animal choices maybe don't work so well. And that's what everyone is in the middle of, from my opinion, trying to work out, which is, where do I use my animal brain? Where do I use my thinking brain? Where do I use my instinctual brain? You're going to find this particularly interesting, I think. A teacher that was with the Paul Solomon teacher in that commune that showed up studied all the religions. He was a Sikh himself from birth, but he found all of them interesting and wanted to discover the metaphysics behind each of them. And he said, every religion has a religious tome, some book that is some kind of guidance, and they all have stories about people who will live 900, 1,000, 1,200 years. He said, that's real. That's how we're supposed to be. He said, our childhood is the first 100 years, and that's why it's such a mess. Right now, it's because it's children raising children. There are no adults on the planet right now. There are children in adult bodies, but there are no adult in adult bodies. Anybody want to argue with me about that?
I don't want to argue that. Like, I like to call them olders rather than elders.
Yeah. Oh, they're just older. Yeah. They have
Like,
more experience. And you know what makes an old person really good at what they do? These right here, these wrinkles. If you look at ape communities, the guy who's in charge does the wrinkles best than over any of the rest of them, because that is a sign of I'm the boss. I'm in charge. I know what the fuck's going on around here. That's what old people, because they have more wrinkles, that we instinctually associate the wrinkles with wisdom and authority.
well, in our culture right now, it's everyone wants to be younger. Everyone wants to look youthful.
Well,
right?
I want to be younger only because I want to live longer, not because it would be nice to be 28 again. You know,
in body. Yeah.
I like girls. You know, these days I don't have as much to offer.
Can we talk a little bit about power? I think, especially in community, you know, you're saying kind of wrinkles are power. And it sounds like the communities that
that's a myth. That's a myth.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, you know, that's a hypnotic statement. You know,
No, I'm not taking you literally, but I do think there is something about the, you know, and I think the communities you've been in have sort of the leader, more or less. You've had a powerful leader that has been the locus of power. Has that worked well? Do you think that's a good model for community or for communal living? And do you have other experiences of like how power is distributed in a group?
So my answer to that is I never worshiped him. I never got to that place of, you know, he's a god and I need to worship him. I loved him and I felt a deep respect for him. I felt connected to him. I felt things that I can't really put into words, maybe even. But I don't really feel like he was better than me or worse than me. He was just different. He had more experience in a particular area of life that I didn't have, and I was there to learn about it. But that didn't make him better than me. It made what he had to tell me better than what I know, but it didn't make him better than me. And so that's really the key, is how do you tell the difference between the being and the doing? When you start mixing up the power of doing with the power of being, things get really messy. You're really stupid is a statement of who someone is, rather than what you just did was so stupid. That's a completely different way of saying it. Their behavior is what you're addressing. You still feel connected to them. You don't want to shit on them. You don't want to sting and run. You just want to say, hey, that really hurt, or that really was just not appropriate. Not, I fucking hate you and you should die. Which is where things get mixed up again, which is, by the way, the foundation of that insanity I was talking about.
Did you witness things getting mixed up in that way a lot in community?
It gets kind of overridden when you have somebody at the head. You know what I mean? Everyone kind of sidesteps that insanity. They push down the crappy power stuff. They were all in their hearts, most of them anyway. They were all there because their hearts told them that was the place to be. And when their hearts told them different, they were kicked out. It wasn't because they were bad people. It's just that whatever the universe was putting in their heart at that point in time didn't have to do with the commune. And it wasn't that they weren't allowed to be there to visit, to be part of the celebrations and stuff like that. They just weren't a commune member because their heart wasn't in being a commune member.
Did you ever have moments when you questioned your heart in the community? Like, do I belong here? Is this right for me?
I got kicked off of the ranch because I was questioning. Because at that point, there was a place where Sheila was mixing up the solar plexus chakra of giving your power away with your heart, coming from your heart, doing what you can to love. I was questioning the motivations behind the people that were in power, where they were actually coming from. It was clear that they were getting mixed up. I wouldn't have been able to put such.
Sorry to interrupt. Who's Sheila?
Sheila was Osho's secretary. essentially what it was. Do you want to hear this story? This is an interesting story. I love
Sure.
telling. There are 9 women that are running the whole scene. They are responsible for the different departments, the cleaning department, the food department, the housing department, the transportation, the medical, so on and so forth, right? They were called the moms, and they all reported to Sheila. And Sheila, in the beginning, I'm sure her heart was in the right place, but her skill and capacity, it was too much for her. She was too tired to continue focusing without doing uppers. So the woman who was responsible for medical supplied her with what she needed to keep her up. And then to get her to go to sleep, because she's buzzing, she gave her downers. Now, I don't know if you know anything about uppers and downers, but if you cycle back and forth between those, even just for a couple of weeks, you get neurotic, you get weird. And that's exactly what happened to her. Her neuroses got amplified, paranoia, all sorts of weird ass crap. Plus, dealing with Oregon, because she wasn't, or whoever it was that was relating to Oregon, besides the fact that they were really scared, they weren't managing that very well. Their expectations, they just didn't do a very good job of relating to, because a lot of people went to this fringe experience because they were so rejected out in normal society. They couldn't find their place in it, right? It was bound to happen anyway, I guess, because no one had any skill for dealing with this, with health at that point in time. So she is starting to implement protocols, that's not the word they would use, to accomplish whatever her goals were, which were obviously insane. I mean, you heard about them poisoning one of my little cousins actually got sick from that, because I'm from Oregon, Washington area, so somebody I knew actually was affected by the poisoning of the salad bar. They put salmonella in it. They were trying to sicken people so they wouldn't vote the next day. That was the whole point of it.
Wow.
What kind of insanity would create that? Okay, so I hate to say it, but okay. So the story is, one of the moms was walking past the wood shop one day. She just had supposedly this bad feeling in the morning, like something bad was going to happen. And in the afternoon, someone nearly cut his thumb off. And she reported this, and of course upset Sheila in whatever state she was in at the point. She says, okay, from now on, everyone is to listen to the mom's intuitions and not question them. So I said, okay. So I have a story I have to tell you here. The apple truck just came in, which was a truck that had a big apple on the side of it that had been converted into a refrigerated truck that brought food back and forth from out in the middle of nowhere. And it came back, because I was doing heavy equipment, it came back, the starter was dead, the clutch was blown, and there were 2 flat tires. Now, I just replaced the starter about a month ago, and the clutch wasn't more than 3 months old, which I had put in. And so I knew that something was up. So I went to go talk to the guy who was driving it. He said, well, I was driving back from Redmond, and I was out here in the middle of nowhere. And I was scared, because what if the truck broke down and I'm stuck out here and some redneck comes along and shoots me? And I'm not safe here. Something bad could happen, and I'll be just stuck out here in the middle of nowhere. Well, apparently at some point there's this big long hill that you go down before you hang a left onto our property. And he went into that hill too fast, and he tried to slow down. And in letting the clutch out too quickly, he blew the clutch. And so he is skidding down the hill with his feet jammed on the brakes, and makes it all the way down. And that's when the tires pop, and he gets down to the bottom, and he's shivering and kind of getting himself together. And he's definitely out in the middle of nowhere. He's not on the property, and anybody could come driving by. It's a fairly major road, even though it's a dirt road. He says, well, I've got to try and get the thing to move. And he says, I know something's going on with the clutch, but I'll put it in the gear, and maybe I can get the truck to move with the starter and get it to go with that. And that's when he burns the starter up. So after telling that story to the crowd, because we met every morning with our mom, who delivered that message of, you have to listen to the mom's intuitions now, I said, so this happened. And my question to you is, did he tune into the possibility of that happening? Did he create that? Did Samya tune into the possibility of that happening, or did she create that? How do you know? You really don't know. And why should we be trusting people's fears? So in a week, I was kicked off. I wasn't surrendered enough, Swami. Which was often what they said to people that they kicked off. I wasn't surrendered enough. And I'm so happy I got kicked off. Because when the whole shit went down, I got brought back and helped to shut the place down, and I got a free van and motorcycle and everything out of it. I had a good time.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up something really poignant for me there. So it's like, different perspectives. One is not necessarily wrong and one's not necessarily right. They can both, exist in this paradox, this place of both perhaps being right, both perhaps being wrong. And to have that hierarchy of which one is more right is deeply problematic.
Right, exactly. Because really around that kind of stuff, I think the crowd needs to make the decision. And I want to give you some information that I think will be useful here. There was a scientist in the 1800s who went to a fair and saw this guy who was selling pieces of paper to guess the number of beans that were in this jar. And at the end of the day, if anyone guessed that number, they would get all the shillings or a good portion of the shillings of whatever the guess was. And on that particular day, no one guessed, but there were like 400 or 500 chits of paper. And the scientist said, can I have all of the papers? And he averaged them out, and it was the exact number of beans. And he followed that up by doing it a few days more after that. And each time it was the exact number of beans. So it's by intelligence, by crowd. That's how ants work also, by the way. If you watch ants, the one by itself doesn't make any sense, but somehow in a group together, they all manage to create what's necessary. Somehow it's built into them. The intelligence of the group knows how to get where it is you want to go. And I agree with you saying, how do you know which is right? It needs to be the group that makes the decision. Group intelligence, not the... They were trying to say that they had
which is different, I feel like, than the mob.
Right. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is an important distinction where I don't fully understand, but I know how dangerous the mob.
Well, the mob is the instinctual brain of us, and the intuition of us. The thinking brain is the...
Like with COVID, for example, was a perfect example of the mob. Everyone was terrified and afraid, and it just created this really dangerous place, society that we're still dealing with to this day.
Well, I mean, that's really in my opinion, a feature of our society, and it came along to, first of all, deal with the dark side, which Trump is a perfect virus to help bring out our sickness. If you think about the cold and the flu, there isn't a cure for it, because the cure is to not eat the crap that we eat. Because all those things do is clean us out of mucus and garbage and toxins and things that don't belong in our body. And if we didn't get sick and take time to let our body heal itself, we'd fucking die. And so in a certain way, Trump and the coronavirus were about helping us to kind of catch ourselves. Look at what the fuck we're doing. Do you remember the day when we all figured out that nobody's driving cars and every city on the planet had no smog? Do you remember those days? Very few people focused on that. That is a clue as to what can happen. People can live in a healthy, beautiful environment, but we have to change the way in which we're doing what we're doing, which, you know, Elon Musk in his weird way is part of helping to fix that, as well as, you know, he's giving juice. I don't know if you heard that, but he's giving juice to Trump, which I'm so happy to hear, because it just means that more darkness is going to get exposed. The whole gun thing, the whole Me Too thing, the whole Black Lives Matter thing, all of those wouldn't have really shown their ugly heads if it wasn't for Trump, who gave everybody who was hiding it permission to behave that way. It really needed to come out. So in a certain way, I'm grateful that he's doing exactly what he's doing. And so there is a scientist from Yale who came on with Neil deGrasse Tyson, his Star Talk show, who is an expert in plagues. He said that the coronavirus plague has performed exactly the same as every other plague in history. And he listed off a whole bunch of events that have occurred for us, as well as for all those other ones. And he said, the things that stuck out for me is that all of the politicians, all of the leaders lie. They hide and keep hidden stuff. They try and keep hidden stuff that can't be hidden anymore. And the other piece is that they all have a roaring 20s afterwards, just like the last epidemic or last plague, which was the Spanish flu. Did you know the Spanish flu was 100 years ago and followed almost exactly the same pattern that we just went through? Most people don't really know that bit of information, but it's amazing if you just go back and look at it. But anyway, our roaring 20s is going to start this year, apparently, according to that scientist.
Okay.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm really curious about the inclusion of rituals into community and how to incorporate things to keep the passion, the heart opening for that community.
So in my opinion, rituals are for creating a certain level of consistency, but also for amplifying our spiritual nature in some way. The problem with rituals is they become ritualistic. Habitual.
You mean by like rigid?
Rigid, yes. They become, doctrine instead of something that someone just made up right now in this moment because this feels like we could all use it. And then the next time it's still usable, and the next time it's still usable, and 3 or 4 years later it may not be so usable, but we've done it all this time. Okay, so that's the only pitfall of. But yes, I like rituals as long as they're not too corny. I am into woo-woo. I have to tell you, I am into woo-woo, but practical woo-woo. If it doesn't work, I reject it completely. If it works in some way, if it makes something work, then I'm into it. There's a lot of spiritual bypassing, as you might know and have experienced in your connection with the people your age these days, investigating the spiritual world.
I laugh with agreement.
If you were to, so what would be your primary advice? Don't do this or do this in terms of like having because I think we started this conversation, and this is something that weighs on me, with you telling us that most communities don't last. That 5 years, 8 years, that might be the best you can do. So I don't think anyone wants to build something that will die in 5 years, or maybe they do, but I'd like to see something last longer. And I'm wondering if you have thoughts like, what's the foundation to build, or what's to avoid?
Let's see. If I was going to build a commune, what would I do? As I said before, I would investigate all of the other successful communes to see which ones are still active after how many years and what it took to make them what they are. You're going to find that in order to exist in the capitalistic system, they had some kind of...
They had one foot in that world.
Well, they did something that brought
something.
service. Yeah, you ever heard of the Loma Linda people? There was a commune out in Loma Linda for like 20 or 30 years. They were kind of Christian based. They made vegetarian food. They had these incredible links that were amazing that you bought in a can. They were so tasty. They brought something to the world that people wanted and purchased and allowed them to exist. So they had some way of making money so that they could support themselves in the environment that they wanted to, in the bubble that they wanted to create. Okay, so you've got to figure that out. What is it that we're going to create? It is financially, finances are simply a representation of people's energy and intent. If your heart is in something, you're going to generate abundance. If it's not, you're not. just focused on making money, then you're going to do that for a while, but your heart's not going to be in it, and then it's all going to fall apart and yada yada. I'm making money because I want a commune. That's not going to work. I'm making this stuff because I want to bring this to the world, and doing it in a commune seems the best way to do it.
Yeah, I think that's an important piece that's sort of easily forgotten. The commune movement in a lot of ways is like, I want to build something like an escape pod. You know, I want to build something that's different. And it's this sort of forgetting that we'll never escape, or, you know, our other people, the world, and that to be successful, to have longevity, you have to offer something. You have to be in connection with the wider world in a way that creates that exchange of energy. You know, you can't build the wall and have the block and still expect to have any kind of thrive or success.
The other piece I would have in place is that whoever is going to lead would get involved with something called system-centered therapy or system-centered training. It's SCT. It is the only viable group work that I have found that is effective for groups and understanding the dynamics in groups. It is the companion to the work that I do, which is a somatic-based therapy. Yeah, mine's for more than one-on-one, and that is more for the group energy. So I would make sure that whoever is going, I read a science fiction book a long time ago where it was about this guy who had been trained in planetary ecology from the political point of view, from the biological point of view, from the mechanical, at the weather level, at the whatever level. They were trained and then brought in to run the planet from a completely healthy scientific place. But he had skills, he had training, he had the ability to hold that big ass mess together. Anybody who's going to try and lead, they've got to put a lot of energy to becoming a leader. Finding the skills that are necessary to become a leader. What does it take to be? How has it been successful? I wouldn't focus too much on what didn't work, because there's too many
Too much.
too much of that. You know, that's kind of like watching soap operas to understand to relate to people, you know. It's like,
yeah,
that's how not to do it, you know.
Well, yeah. So thank you, Akash. I really appreciate the wisdom you offered us today, and yeah, a lot to take in.
appreciate you. That was good. Thank you.
Had fun. Thank you, guys.
When you're ready to begin your journey, visit elementalmovement.life. We'll see you there.